To break all of that down and a whole lot more, we're going to welcome in adjunct professor at Montclair State University, Dan Geltrude. Okay, Dan, no surprise, I don't think, to anyone here. So a new report from the American Farm Bureau Federation showing a 10-person barbecue could cost up to $71.22. That's a 5% increase from just last year and a whole 30% more expensive from what it was 5 years ago. Dan, what's your advice to Americans looking to save a little money on their parties this year?
Well, this is a tough one because this is exactly where Americans are feeling it the most, and that's at the grocery store for food, for the basics. How about this? Since the Biden administration came in, gas prices are up 45%, and we all know that this is a heavily traveled holiday. So what can you do? Well, you have to cut back. It all comes down to being able to stay within your budget. So a very bad debate aside, people are still very, very unhappy with what's going on with Joe Biden.
Yeah, Dan, I mean, I'm not a drinker, but when I look at this, even beer up 3.1%, soda up over 2%. All these tiny little things you don't think about, like tomatoes, they're up almost 4%. Every little detail of your barbecue is much more expensive this year. Okay, so let's stick with those inflated prices. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell announcing the central bank is still not ready to offer interest rate cuts anytime soon, insisting it just needs more confidence. Inflation is headed down to that long-sought 2%. Dan, we talk about this every single week. We talk about that 2% number. Do you see the central bank cutting rates at all this year?
I really don't. And I don't think that they can cut rates unless there's some type of disaster, because inflation is simply too persistent. So much for inflation being transitory, right? And as far as this 2%, that the Fed keeps throwing around as that's what their outcome needs to be. That 2% number, Alex, is year over year. We're up over 20% when you factor in the accumulation of inflation. So 2%, forget about that. We're not talking about going back to where it was. We're just saying, well, we'll try to keep it in check, and we're stuck with all the increases we've already experienced.
Yeah, Dan, I agree. Let's just throw away that 2% number. It's not happening. And I don't even want to ask you about it anymore because we know the answer every single time. Okay, so how about this? Kind of exciting news. So the FDA expanding available treatments for Alzheimer's by approving Eli Lilly's Kisunla. So far, the treatment for the mind-altering disease has been very limited, and this drug has faced several obstacles for its approval. Dan, do you think it's going to stay on the market?
Well, this is really good news anytime we're making progress with an insidious disease like Alzheimer's. But let's keep in mind, this is not a cure. This is about slowing the progression of the disease. And it's really, really expensive. So I do see this as good news. Let's hope that we continue to develop, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, anybody who's experienced or had a family member who has gone through this, just slowing down the progression of the disease, I think is good news. So the AI boom is actually causing Google's carbon emission to rise. So by close to 50% since back to 2019. The uptick mostly stemming from data center energy consumption and supply chain emissions. The government, obviously, Dan, loves to use the environment as an excuse to regulate and control industries, obviously, such as mandating EVs, which I will say time and time again are not environmentally friendly whatsoever. Dan, are AI tech companies going to be under the same thumb as the auto industry?
Well, here we go, right? So AI uses an enormous amount of electricity. So what do? Do we, because of those emission statistics, do we say, all right, forget about AI? Of course not. We are going to have to continue to progress. If you look at Google, for example, they're up 13% just year over year in their emissions output. So this is a significant challenge. And the statistics out there say that emissions due to the progress of AI will increase by 20% by the year 2030. So we're going to have to find some other solution, or we're going to have to go back to the way life was
Many
years ago, which is not happening.
Yeah. Dan Geltrude, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Have a fantastic 4th of July if we don't see you again.
You too, Alex.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.